Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, I hope you are all doing well, inshallah. In this video, inshallah, I aim to respond to the claim that Ilm Al-Kalām, dialectical theology, is against the Quran, Sunnah, is against the way of the Salaf. It is something that is blameworthy, something that is sinful. This claim is made by our Salafi brothers as well as their du'at and scholars. So first thing is first, we need to define what Ilm Al-Kalām is. And this is very important because there is a principle, al-hukmu ala shay'i far'un an tasawwurihi, that a judgment regarding something, giving a correct judgment regarding something is a far', meaning it follows from its tasawwur, its conceptualization. In other words, you can only be in a position to judge something if you have a correct concept of that thing. So for example, this book before me, I can only give a true judgment regarding the book if I have a true and a correct conceptualization regarding the reality of the book, what the book is. Only then can I give a judgment about the book. Therefore, I'm going to first define what Ilm Al-Kalām is. I'm going to give definition of Ilm Al-Kalām from 3 different books, inshallah. And then we will move forward dealing with some of the quotes from the Pious Salaf. So this in front of me is the Muqaddimah of Imām Ibn Khaldūn rahimahullah. On page 477, under the chapter title Ilm Al-Kalām, Imām Ibn Khaldūn, he defines Ilm Al-Kalām as follows: وَهُوَ عِلْمٌ يَتَضَمَّنُ الْحِجَاجَ عَنِ الْأَقَائِدِ الْإِيمَانِيَّةِ بالأدلة العقلية والرد على المبتدعة المنحرفين في الاعتقاد عن مذاهب السلف وأهل السنة. This, meaning Ilm Al-Kalām, dialectical theology, is a science that involves arguing with logical proofs in defense of the articles of faith and refuting innovators who deviate in their dogmas from the path of the Salaf and the Ahl Sunnah. So what does this mean? This, in summation, means that Ilm Al-Kalām is about defending your creedal matters, using definitive evidences, using logical proofs. Second definition is from Sharh al-Maqasid, and this is a very important book because this is by a mutakallim, by a theologian, a very famous theologian, a reputable theologian, Imām Taftāzānī. And brothers and sisters, I want to mention as emphasis that when we want to understand technical terms, nomenclatures of any discipline, it is important that we refer to the specialists and scholars of that discipline. So for example, if we want to understand certain technical terms of medicine, we refer to the doctors. If we want to understand certain istilahat of hadith, we refer to the muhaddithun. Likewise, tafsir to the mufassirun. So it is only fair that we understand what Ilm Al-Kalām is by asking the theologian mutakallimun. If a Salafi or Salafi scholar in the 21st century who doesn't have knowledge of Ilm Al-Kalām is utterly oblivious to Ilm Al-Kalām, if they define Ilm Al-Kalām for the mutakallimun, then this is unfair. So Allāmah Taftāzānī, in this book Sharh al-Maqasid, he gives definition of Ilm Al-Kalām on page 27. The Ilm Al-Kalām, ta'arifu Ilm Al-Kalām, the definition of Ilm Al-Kalām is هو العلم بالعقائد الدينية عن الأدلة اليقينية. Ilm Al-Kalām is a discipline regarding the tenets of faith, regarding creedal matters, which are established through definitive evidences, al-adilla al-yaqiniya. So again, what is Ilm Al-Kalām? Ilm Al-Kalām is the science of Aqidah in which the mutakallim, the theologian, defends the articles of faith by using definitive evidences. Third quote, and this is a very important book because the Salafi brothers, our Salafi brothers and their scholars, they claim to be Ḥanbalī in Aqidah or Athari in Aqidah. And this book is by a Ḥanbalī Athari. Al-Hanabila wal-Ikhtilaf ma'a Salafiyyat al-Mu'asira. Hanabila and their differences with the contemporary and modern Salafis. So the true Ḥanbalīs and their ikhtilaf with the modern Salafis. Fil aqaid, in creedal matters, wal fiqh, jurisprudence, and fit tasawwuf, in tasawwuf. So in this book on page 165, he mentions كثير من طلبة العلم المخالفين, that many of the students of knowledge who are against علم الكلام لا يعرفون ما هو علم الكلام, they don't know, they don't have an idea of what علم الكلام is. ولذلك, for this reason, because of their ignorance, تجدهم, you find them يهاجمونه, they viciously attack علم الكلام and the people of kalam من غير دراية, without any understanding. وعلم الكلام, and then he defines علم الكلام. علم الكلام هو علم دراية العقائد والرد على الشبهات بالأدلة العقلية. علم الكلام is a discipline regarding understanding aqaid and responding to the shubhat, the objections, through logical evidences. وهذه طريقة أهل السنة, and this is the methodology of the أهل السنة, كما قال, like mentioned by Ibn Hamdan al-Ḥanbalī in Sifatul Fatwa. And he also then quotes a similar definition from Imām As-Safarini, the Ḥanbalī scholar, in his Lawāmi'ul Anwār. And Imām Safarini also mentions the objective of Ilm Al-Kalām is to respond to the deviated sects and to repudiate and answer their obfuscation. And then Imām Safarini also mentions in Lawāmi'ul Anwār that the istimdad and the usul, the basis of Ilm Al-Kalām, where Ilm Al-Kalām is established from and derived from, number one, min al-kitab, from the Quran, was Sunnah, wal ijma' and wal nadhr al-sahih. So Ilm Al-Kalām is established from the Quran, the Sunnah, the consensus of the scholars, and correct or valid theoretical reflection. These are Ḥanbalī scholars are saying this about Ilm Al-Kalām. So from these few definitions, it's very clear that Ilm Al-Kalām is something mamduh, praiseworthy, and one should endeavor in studying Ilm Al-Kalām if they can. So then the question arises, why do we find certain quotes from the pious Salaf who have condemned and censured Ilm Al-Kalām, and at times with in very severe and strong words? So the short answer to that is that they were referring to a certain type of Ilm Al-Kalām, Kalam madhmoom, Kalam which is blameworthy. Why is it blameworthy? Because it is used against the Quran, it is used against the Sunnah, it is used against Deen and Islam. Conversely, that Kalam which we are speaking of, which is used to defend our aqaid and our Deen, that is mamduh and is praiseworthy. Therefore, I'm going to start with Imām Abū Ḥanīfah rahimahullah. And the irony is that the Salafi scholars who quote the Salaf against Ilm Al-Kalām, they use Imām Abū Ḥanīfah. But any student of knowledge who has studied the Hanafi school, and me being a student of the Hanafi school, they will know that Imām Abū Ḥanīfah rahmatullahi alayhi, he was a very big mutakallim. He was all for Ilm Al-Kalām. Rather, before he pursued and he traversed the path of fiqh, he first studied Ilm Al-Kalām. Therefore, I'm going to give a few quotes, inshaAllah, which clearly demonstrates that Imām Abū Ḥanīfah rahmatullahi alayhi was all for Ilm Al-Kalām, and he was not against Ilm Al-Kalām. This quote is from Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi's Tarikh, also mentioned by Muwaffaq al-Makki in the Manaqib and Virtues of Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah rahmatullahi alayhi said, كنت أنظر في الكلام, that I would look at kalam, I would study kalam, حتى بلغت فيه مبلغا, to such an extent that I reached a very high level, يشار إلي فيه بالأصابع, the people began to point at me with their fingers, saying that this is the mutakallim Abu Hanifa, this is the theologian Abu Hanifa who argues and who debates with deviated people. Also is mentioned, كان أبو حنيفة أول أمره, that Imam Abu Hanifa's first matter, his first discourse and his first chapter to knowledge was Ilm Al-Kalām, يجاد أهل الهوى, whereby he would argue with the people of whims and desires, حتى صار رأسا في ذلك, to such an extent that he became a pioneer, a leading figure in Ilm Al-Kalām, and he was looked up to regarding Ilm Al-Kalām. Imam Muwaffaq al-Makki also mentions that Imam Abu Hanifa studied Ilm Al-Kalām حتى مهر فيه, to such an extent that he became proficient and he gained prowess in Ilm Al-Kalām. It is also mentioned from his son, Imam Abū Ḥanīfah's son Aḥmad, that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah يأمرني بطلب الكلام, that my father Abu Hanifa would instruct me to study Ilm Al-Kalām, ويحدوني كثيرا عليه, and he would abundantly encourage me regarding Ilm Al-Kalām, and he would say, oh son, ya bunayya, study Ilm Al-Kalām. Why? فإنه الفقه الأكبر, because Ilm Al-Kalām is the greater fiqh. And the book that is being attributed towards Imam Abū Ḥanīfah in Aqidah is called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. It's also mentioned that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, he had a halaqah, he had a gathering where he would teach Ilm Al-Kalām. It's also mentioned in the Manaqib of Imam Qurdari regarding Imam Abū Ḥanīfah that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah kana Abu Hanifa wa Abu Yusuf wa Muhammad wa Zufar wa Hammad, that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, Imam Abu Yusuf, his student, his other student Muhammad, and his other student Zufar, and his son Hammad, they would all use Ilm Al-Kalām. And wahum a'immatul ilm, they were the a'imma, they were the leaders of knowledge. And this argumentation that they would use via Ilm Al-Kalām, wahiya al-khusuma al-mahmuda, this is praiseworthy argumentation. Why? Because they would use Ilm Al-Kalām to expose the truth and to defend Islam. So there are several quotes, my dear friends. I have a plethora of quotes, copious quotes, but the objective here is very clear that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, his students were all pro Ilm Al-Kalām. And Imam Tahawi, whose creedal work, his treatise is known, is accepted by everyone, including the Salafi brothers, he starts off the first few lines by saying that this aqidah, bayanu aqidat fuqaha al-millah, that this is exposition of the creed of the fuqaha of the religion. And he mentions three names in particular: Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad. Also, those who have studied the biography of Imam Abū Ḥanīfah, they will know that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah entered Basra countless times to debate the Jahmiyyah, Qadri, etc. So it's very clear to the students of knowledge, especially who study the Hanafi school, that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah was all for Kalam. He was not against Ilm Al-Kalām, like our Salafi brothers unfortunately say, without studying the quotes properly. But then the question does arise, that why we do find, to be fair, we do find quotes from Imam Abū Ḥanīfah where he condemns Ilm Al-Kalām. So again, the answer is that he was referring to a certain type of Ilm Al-Kalām, the Ilm Al-Kalām which is used for against Islam. And the evidence to this is because that's the only way we're going to reconcile between the statements. And those statements which postulate that he was against Ilm Al-Kalām, they have been explained by the Hanafi scholars, like Ibn Humam in his Fathul Qadir, like Ibn Rujaym inside his Bahr al-Ra'iq, etc. And there's also a very famous incident in these books that Imam Abū Ḥanīfah rahmatullahi alayhi, once he saw his son Hammad, he was debating using Ilm Al-Kalām. So he told him to stand up and said, why are you debating? So he said, oh father, we have seen you debating, we have seen you use Ilm Al-Kalām, and now you are stopping us. So Imam Abū Ḥanīfah rahmatullahi alayhi said, yes, that we used to debate, we used to use Ilm Al-Kalām, but وَكَأَنَّ عَلَى رُؤُوسِنَا الطَّيْرِ, when we would debate, it was as though we had a bird sitting on our head. This is a way of explaining that we were very careful, we were scrupulous in what we would say. مَخَافَةَ أَن يَزِلَّ صَاحِبُنَا, with the fear that our interlocutor might slip. And today, oh my son, I see you people, you use Ilm Al-Kalām to make your interlocutor slip. You want him to say, utter the words of kufr. And a person who wants the interlocutor na'udhu billah to do kufr, he's done kufr before him. And this is what he says, فَقَدْ أَرَادَ كُفْرَهُ فَهُوَ قَدْ كَفَرَ قَبْلَ صَاحِبِهِ. This is very dangerous, and this is unfortunately, it happens today where people, they deliberately want the interlocutor to say things of misguidance and kufr so they can prove their point. This is a very dangerous position to be in. So again, very clear that he was referring to that Ilm Al-Kalām which was used for wrong reasons. So Ilm Al-Kalām is a defensive mechanism. It is a defensive mechanism, it is a means. And sometimes a means can be used in a good way or a bad way. A knife can be used to cook fruit, mashallah, to cook good things and for our health and for our family. And a knife can also be used, na'udhu billah, to stab someone, to murder someone. So this is very important to keep this in our mind when we study the quotes of the Salaf regarding Ilm Al-Kalām. Likewise, Imam Shāfiʿī rahmatullahi alayhi is known regarding Imam Shāfiʿī that he condemned Ilm Al-Kalām in the strongest words and terms. And unfortunately, the Salafi scholars, they mention this, but they don't mention the context behind these quotes, nor do they mention the contradictory statements that are established from Imam Shāfiʿī regarding Ilm Al-Kalām. The statements that the Salafi brothers use regarding Ilm Al-Kalām, or against Ilm Al-Kalām, that have been transmitted from Imam Shāfiʿī, is as follows. Imam Shāfi'ī radiyallahu anhu said, لَوْ عَلِمَ النَّاسُ مَا فِي الْكَلَامِ مِنَ الْأَهْوَاءِ, that if people knew what desires and whims are in Ilm Al-Kalām, لَفَرُّوا منه كما يفرون من الأسد. They would flee and run away from kalam like they run away from a lion. ولأن يلقى الله تعالى العبد بكل ذنب سوى الإشراك. And if the slave of Allah meets Allah with every sin except for shirk, خير له, it's better for him that he meets Allah with anything of kalam, بشيء من الكلام. And Imam Shāfiʿī also deemed that the people of kalam and يضربوا بالجريد, that they should be hit with journals and newspapers, ويطاف بهم في العشائر, and they should be taken around amongst their families and tribes, and then it should be said to the people, هذا جزاء من ترك الكتاب والسنة. This is the reward of the one who abandoned. This punishment, this humiliation is the punishment of the person who abandons the kitab and the sunnah. So the first thing I want to mention regarding this quote is that the last part of this quote is evidence that Imam Shāfiʿī was referring to a certain type of kalam. He says, هذا جزاء من ترك الكتاب والسنة. This is the reward of the one who abandons the Quran and Sunnah. So the kalam that is used to abandon the Quran and Sunnah, that is blameworthy. That kalam is kalam madhmoom. But the kalam that we are speaking of, the kalam that's in our discussion at the moment, this is kalam which is used to defend the Quran and Sunnah, which is used to defend Islam. And Imam Bayhaqi rahmatullahi alayhi, he explains this in this manner. Imam Bayhaqi, in the Manaqib and the virtue of Imam Shāfiʿī, he mentions that this condemnation from Imam Shāfiʿī is regarding the people of ahwa, of desires, like Hafs and Hafs Fard. And he then quotes his Imam Shāfiዒ's student, Imam Rabi al-Muradi and Abu al-Walid al-Makki, who said that Imam Shāfiʿī said these strong words against a certain mutakallim, Hafs, who was a deviated individual. And Imam Shāfiʿī rahmatullahi alayhi condemned Ilm Al-Kalām in that context, not Ilm Al-Kalām generally, but that person, that specific mutakallim. And this is why I have the scans here in front of me. Imam Bayhaqi mentions on page 454 of Manaqib of Imam Shāfiʿī, he says, وَكَيْفَ يَكُونُ كَلَامُ أَهْلِ السُنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ مَذْمُومًا عِنْدَهُ وَقَدْ تَكَلَّمَ فِيهِ. How can the kalam of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah be blameworthy in the sight of Imam Shāfiʿī, when he himself, Imam Shāfiʿī, used kalam, وَقَدْ تَكَلَّمَ فِيهِ, and وَنَاظَرَ مَنْ نَاظَرَهُ فِيهِ, and he debated whom he debated. And is well known regarding Imam Shāfiʿī rahmatullahi alayhi that he had written books in kalam. He had two books in kalam. One was regarding the correct meaning of nubuwa and refutation on barahama, and the second book was regarding refutation on the people of ahwa, whims and desires. And Imam Abu al-Muzaffar al-Isfaraini al-Shāfiʿī rahimahullah inside his tafsir has also given a similar explanation. So it's very clear from the Shāfi'i scholars who explained the statements of Imam Shāfi'i regarding the condemnation of kalam, that he was referring to a certain type of kalam which we are all against, because that kalam is used against Quran and Sunnah, or is against Quran and Sunnah. The third quote or third types of quote that are used are from Imam Ahmad bin Hambal rahmatullahi alayhi, that he was also against Ilm Al-Kalām. Again, not true. Imam Ahmad bin Hambal was not against every type of Ilm Al-Kalām. I'm quoting the same book, Al-Hanabila wal-Ikhtilaf ma'a Salafiyyat al-Mu'asira. In there is a quote from Ibn Hamdan al-Ḥanbalī in his Sifat al-Fatwa. He mentions that Imam Ahmad bin Hambal said, Kunna nu'maru bis-sukut. We were instructed to stay silent and not use kalam. فَلَمَّا دُعِينَا إِلَى الْكَلَامِ تَكَلَّمْنَا. However, when we were called and invited towards kalam, we then spoke. Ibn Hamdan says that this is referring to the time of fitna, when the issue of Quran, Khalqul Quran, the creation of Quran had risen. Imam Ahmad bin Hambal, to defend the position of the Ahl Sunnah, he used kalam. And then the author says that this usage of kalam because of necessity, because Imam Ahmad bin Hambal used it because of necessity, dharura, this explanation is given by the Ash'ari and also by Imam Ghazālī. So Imam Ghazālī rahmatullahi alayhi, inside his Iljām al-Awām and ʿIlm Al-Kalām, where he has explained the restriction of the usage of Ilm Al-Kalām. I agree and I concede, I acknowledge the fact that Ilm Al-Kalām is not for everyone. Ilm Al-Kalām has a very restricted usage, and Imam Ghazālī mentions only two places where Ilm Al-Kalām should be used. Number one, there is such a shubha, a question that cannot be removed except through Ilm Al-Kalām. Or number two, a student of knowledge who's rasikh, who's proficient in Aqidah, and they study Ilm Al-Kalām, They study Ilm Al-Kalām to protect and preserve the Aqidah of the Ummah. This is why in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Ud'u ila sabila rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izatil hasana. That call towards the path of your Lord with wisdom and good advice. This is the default position. But sometimes وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Sometimes you have to debate them with the best of manners. So Ilm Al-Kalām does come under munadhara and debating. And the example Imam Ghazālī gives, a very profound example, that Ilm Al-Kalām is like medicine. Is like medicine. Medicine is only given and prescribed by the doctor to a person who is ill. Not everybody uses medicine. If everybody uses medicine, they will become ill. Yes, everybody needs water. The Quran and Sunnah is like the water, is general need for everyone. But sometimes specific individuals need medicine. In the same way, sometimes specific individuals need Ilm Al-Kalām. Not that na'udhu billah, Ilm Al-Kalām is higher than Quran and Sunnah. Astaghfirullah. This is also an utter allegation and slander. It is a means, is a mechanism, and sometimes is used, and Imam Ghazālī mentioned it should be used in appropriate measure, not too much. So like a medicine is only given by the doctor with certain measure. Likewise, a mutakallim, a person who's qualified in Ilm Al-Kalām, they will use kalam based on need and darura. Not every person can sit on YouTube or walk into a park and become a mutakallim. No, they have to have knowledge of Ilm Al-Kalām, they have to have knowledge of the science. And the other thing I want to mention is that those scholars who are against Ilm Al-Kalām, they revere people like Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi, and Hafiz ibn Taymiyyah whom we also respect and revere, Shaykh al-Islam. His books are filled with kalam and philosophy. His Daru Ta'arud Bayn al-Aql wa Naql, his Bayanu Talbis al-Jahmiyya, which is a refutation on Imam Razi rahmatullahi alayhi's book. Let me just double check that because I don't want to mislead the audience. Yes, so Imam, so his Daru Ta'arud Bayn al-Aql wa Naql, his Minhaj al-Sunnah, his Bayan al-Talbis Jahmiyya, which is a refutation against Imam Razi's Asas al-Taqdees. A fair student of knowledge will concede that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was at the forefront using Ilm Al-Kalām and philosophy and theoretical reflection. And the ajib thing is, I saw one Salafi da'i on YouTube saying, well, Ibn Taymiyyah was high, he had a high status and knowledge, therefore he could use Ilm Al-Kalām. But quite frankly, that's hypocritical. That is hypocritical. Because if Ibn Taymiyyah can use it because of his status, then why can't those scholars who are arguably greater than him, if not equal to him, with all due respect, like Imam Ghazālī and other Ash'ari, why can't they use it? So I want to emphasize again, yes, Ilm Al-Kalām is not for everyone, but it has a specific need with its restrictions and sharait conditions, and is permissible to use. And from this book he quotes the likes of Ibn Mufli al-Ḥanbalī and scholars like Ibn Hamid Tamimi Qadi Abu Ya'la Ḥanbalī, Safarini Ḥanbalī, who are all with the opinion that Ilm Al-Kalām, even in the Ḥanbalī madhab, the correct madhab is that Ilm Al-Kalām is allowed. And then they give a plethora of quotes from Imam Ahmad bin Hambal. I don't want to go into all those quotes because the video will become very long, but I've given you the reference. Finally, I want to mention there was one Salafi da'i who recently had a podcast here in the UK, a very famous podcast, and in there the questioner quite arrogantly and ignorantly, if I can say this, he was refuting the mutakallimun, and he mentioned Aristotle and Plato and these Greek philosophers, and then he mentioned Ghazālī in the same context. Now this brother, may Allah guide him and guide us, this Salafi da'i, he's a complete ignoramus. He hasn't studied philosophy, nor has he studied Ilm Al-Kalām. And it was quite upsetting because he mentioned Imam Ghazālī with these Greek philosophers. Me being a student of philosophy, studied undergraduate in philosophy and also completed my master's in philosophy, I can assert with a considerable amount of assurance that philosophy is very diverse. What do you mean by philosophy? By philosophy, if you mean rational inquiry, rational investigation, then there's nothing wrong with that. This is proven from the Quran. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبْلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ وَإِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ رُفِعَتْ وَإِلَى الْجِبَالِ كَيْفَ نُصِبَتْ, and other verses that clearly encourage theoretical reflection, rational inquiry, etc. But by philosophy, if you mean the philosophy, the schools of philosophy that have been taught in the institutes and the universities, then yes, I agree. A lot of what is taught is problematic, because the main schools of philosophy here in the West at least are based on skepticism and tashkik. But this is completely distinct. It is completely in contradistinction what the mutakallimun do. The mutakallimun, they use Ilm Al-Kalām to establish, yes, through definitive evidences, Allah's oneness, prophethood, etc. Whereas philosophy is all about skepticism. So there's tabayun, there's a complete distinction between Ilm Al-Kalām and this meaning of philosophy. And the ajib thing is that Salafi Da'i, he mentioned Imam Ghazālī with Plato and Aristotle, etc., not knowing that Imam Ghazālī was one of the pioneers of refuting the philosophers. Yes, the Ash'ari and Imam Ghazālī in particular were one of the pioneers at the forefront. Imam Ghazālī gives such a blow to the philosophers that they haven't recovered from that blow hitherto. I have this in front of me, Imam Ghazālī's work, Tahafut al-Falasifa, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. This is a very good print, as the Arabic and the English. He has challenged the philosophers on 20 issues, 17 being bid'ah, innovation according to Imam Ghazālī, and 3 being kufr, disbelief, heresy. And he has declared the likes of Ibn Sina as kafir. I don't want to go into the takfir issue, but I'm just mentioning that Imam Ghazālī challenged the philosophers head on. And not only did he challenge them, he studied philosophy before he refuted them. He wrote his maqasid falasifa, the aims and objective of philosophy. And when the philosophers accepted his works and they regarded him as a evidence and hujjah in philosophy, then he wrote his refutation, which is clearly evidence that you can only refute or respond to something which you have complete understanding. So these brothers, with all due respect, that say Ilm Al-Kalām is bid'ah and philosophy is haram, and subhanallah, they don't have a clue what they're talking about, unfortunately. So I don't want to go elaborate or elucidate this discourse further. I think it's quite clear Ilm Al-Kalām, what Ilm Al-Kalām is. The quotes that are transmitted from the Salaf regarding the condemnation of Kalam, those quotes are referring to a certain type of Kalam. The evidence is because you find contradictory statements from those scholars like Imam Abū Ḥanīfah and Imām Shāfiʿī and Imam Aḥmad and Hánbal, etc. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the true understanding of deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the best in both worlds. Jazakumullah khairan for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.